It's great to be here this morning. My name is Keith. I'm the executive director for Shiloh and have been since 2014. And it's just exciting what God is doing in our city with the lives of kids and youth that we get to work with. Let me encourage you this morning, if you are here and you have been praying for somebody that maybe is going through a challenge or doesn't know Jesus, don't lose hope. Continue to pray, continue to stand on the promises of God, and know that God hears you, and know that God is with you in that moment and in that season. So don't lose hope with that. So you can go to the next slide. Okay. Some of you, this is going to be very new of what Shiloh is, who we are, introduction of what we do, and just the partnership that we have with City South is amazing. I've known Tyson for a very, very long time, and so it's great to have this church on board and just contributing and connecting to life change. So Shiloh in the late 1990s, which is a long time ago now, this guy right here, Pastor Raymond Reeb, was walking downtown Edmonton, and he came to a playground and saw kids playing and didn't see, any adults around. He saw some drugs that were on the ground. He saw some needles that were on the ground. And in that moment, God spoke to him and said, "What are you going to do for my children?" And he didn't have an answer to the question then, but he wrestled with it, brought it back to his church. He was at that time the senior pastor of Southside Pentecostal. And just began to pray through what that looked like. And out of that question came Shiloh. And in 2000 was the first summer that kids came onto the property. You can go to the next slide. So Shiloh, our mission is to engage vulnerable children and youth, as you can see, with life-changing experiences and mentorships that leads them to grow in community and relationship with Jesus. And we do that through our values, and a big one is obviously passion for Jesus, building relationships, engaging experiences, but this idea of unconditional love. As you're going to hear, and as you continue to get connected and learn more about Shiloh, you're going to understand that a lot of the kids and youth that we deal with, the idea of love and unconditional love is a very foreign concept. And so we come around these students, these kids and teens, and just offer that love. And it's so valuable and so critical to what we do. You can go to the next slide. So our kids that we deal with, ages 7 to 17, come predominantly from lower income families, from group homes and foster care. And that's the demographic that we basically deal with. About 95% of our kids that come into our programming are non-churched or have zero faith background whatsoever. They may have heard about who Jesus is if they've attended something we've put on, but it is very much a mission field with this group of kids. And if you know anything about kids that live in group homes specifically, you know the challenges that exist. There's a group home out by Bonaccord called Oak Hill. And it's sort of like this last stop for kids. And if they get kicked out of Oak Hill, the next stop is almost juvie for them. And every summer we get 20 to 25 of these kids that come to our summer camps. And you know what? They are kids who just need to know that they're loved and cared for. They didn't have a choice on who their parents were. They didn't have a choice under the circumstances that happened in their life. Yet God cares and loves so much for each and one of the students that we deal with. You can go to the next slide. So our summer program, you can see some of the pictures. We got some pictures out there. We do horses, we do basketball, we do biking. We have swimming pools, we do campfires, we have transportation. So one of our stops, the Southside stop, is your building. And so this summer, for 7 weeks, we're gonna have kids that are gonna come and be dropped off in front of your building. I think last year you had like coffee and some people volunteering to engage with parents, and that was just like an amazing thing and opportunity. And I know that's the plan again this summer, and so we're excited that we're going to have that chance, and you're going to have that chance to engage with those families and parents. The other thing we do is we offer kids the greatest week of their life, and right now that number, 438 kids registered for 7 weeks, is old. Like, I think we had 6 kids register yesterday. We're going to have about 450 to 455 kids registered for camp this summer. Last year we had 384. So it's significantly more this year over 7 weeks. And so we are excited. We recognize it's a major challenge. It takes a lot of people to make that happen. We'll have about 20 staff over the summer and about 70 volunteers to ensure that we can make our program during the summertime run. But it is like vital and critical. And one of the things that really drives what we do is prayer. It was talked about this morning, the spiritual realm that we can't see, but we know exists. And I know for a fact that the kids that we are showing love to, that we are introducing to the gospel, that Satan wants nothing more than to keep their lives absolutely destroyed. But God is doing something. At the back of a table, and I have these cards. These cards have the name of a student that's coming out to camp this summer, has the dates that they're coming out, and an age group that they're coming, their first name. If you would mind grabbing 1 or 2 after the service and just committing to praying for the student that is on here. We know that it's absolutely necessary and critical that we have just prayer in everything that we do to ensure that the gates of hell will not prevail. We know that we have the victory, but we know that we need to continue to pray. You can go to the next slide. So our camp, there's your church, City South Church, the little dot. 52 minutes to get to the camp. Now, if you want to take the scenic route, it's 54. So you can add a couple minutes to your drive if you want. But it's not too far from the south side of Edmonton. And so I know you've got a mission team and a group of students coming out this summer, which is amazing. But if you do want to engage even at another level or come and volunteer, we always need help in the kitchen, at the barn, with maintenance. We've got a quarter section in a lot of buildings, and so something always goes wrong and breaks. And so if you're interested in connecting that way, even if it's once a week, once a month, we can always use help out there in the summertime. And so especially if it's a nice day, just come out for a drive, come hang out, do some work. We'll feed you lunch, dinner, breakfast, whatever you want, and you can engage in that way. A big piece to what we do, like I mentioned, is we're going to need about 70 volunteers over the course of this summer. And so I got a video of a guy named Patrick that we're going to watch. He volunteered and has volunteered, and so you can just watch his story.
Shiloh, and I wasn't thinking much of it just because I didn't really have like any volunteer experience like Shiloh before. So I saw basketball and first camp and I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. I've never done anything like this before. And signed up for there. Back in 2019, I'd say I wasn't really doing too well for myself. I'd say like I was kind of lost, and the opportunity just kind of came out of the blue, and I took it. And since then, I feel like looking back on that experience, I've learned a lot about what I'm good at. And I feel like it was almost like God's way of saying, hey, here are some spiritual gifts that you have. Why don't you use it for something good? After doing Shiloh, I started volunteering at the Sexual Assault Center at the U of A. And I feel like a lot of the skill set that I built from Shiloh was able to like transition over to the Sexual Assault Center in terms of like building relationships with people like right off the get-go, trying to learn more about their stories. I've come across a lot of kids who just seem a little insecure at the start of camp, but like as the weeks go on, or like days go on within the week, anyone who's considering Shiloh, you just gotta like listen or just take a jump on the deep end. I like knowing that I could be there for like a kid, hopefully like impact their life in a positive way. Because I know some of like the backgrounds of some of the people who walk through Shiloh, they're not the greatest, but by the end of the week, it seems like they do have like the time of their life. They're having fun. They're just being themselves, and like seeing that, it just feels so good. Shiloh kind of gave me perspective of resilience, even though I had like some hard weeks. It's great knowing that like I was bringing something to the table.
This past summer, one of our campfire times, we have a campfire time every night. It's a 13 to 15-year-old week. We had about 50 students out. And the speaker during that week was talking about just like hardships and challenges in life. And he shared his own story of growing up with an absent father, a lot of loneliness. And he basically had this door, took this door, and he took a hammer, and he talked about how things that are done to us or spoken over us can cause damage to ourselves. And so he started hammering the door with the hammer. And as the week progressed, he then asked the students, what are some words or phrases that have been spoken over you that have been hurtful? And you can't see it from where you're sitting, it's painted white, but some of the words that were spoken were useless, waste of space, unloved, an accident. Now, I've got like 3 kids, probably saw them. They were pretty behaved this morning. Those words, I can't even fathom somebody, an adult, speaking over them. And the hurt that would cause. And yet, so many kids and youth that we deal with, that is their daily life that happens directly in our city. And as the week came to a close, speaker then talked about God, talked about God's love, talked about forgiveness and hope that exists. And he painted the door white. And well, the scars are still there, and the words that were spoken are still, there's wounds there, there's challenges there. Every student left knowing that they're not alone on this journey anymore. That God is with them, God is for them. There's caring volunteers and leaders that are in their corner that want to walk with them. And that's what it's about. It's about the recognition that we've got kids that come out that think that life is hopeless and they're alone and nobody cares, and they leave knowing that there's at least one person that cares about them and is in their corner. You go to the next slide. Oh, you are there. Never mind. Don't go to the next one. And that's where our Connections program is so vital. And so that's our follow-up program to the camp. Years ago, when we just ran a summer camp, and I came on as the executive director, I was like, man, we've got to do follow-up with these kids. We cannot just share the gospel and then be like, peace out, maybe we'll see you again, maybe not. And so that's where our Connections follow-up program really began to take shape, and we started doing things that we could begin to see kids being discipled. We could see kids getting connected to local churches and youth groups and drop-in centers and positive communities where we could continue that engagement. And so this year we have 5 connection workers or interns that work with us. We run weekly drop-in out of Abbotsfield Rec Center. Every Wednesday we run boys groups and girls groups. We have a horse program that we've got going on outside of the city. And so all these ways that we're working to get kids connected to positive community. And our 5 connection staff work one-on-one with 5 kids, or youth, I guess. And they've been taking them to church, getting them connected to youth groups. And so it's just about a continuation, that it's not just this camp experience, but it's like we want to walk with you, we want to get connected with you, and we want to see you advance and grow, and know that you've got a community and a family behind you. You go to the next slide. So how does it work? And this is where partnerships are so critical and why this is so great that your church is hopped on board. So for summer camp, we charge $50 for the week of camp. If families, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids cannot afford it, we say pay what you can. We just want you to show up to the bus. So it could be $5 per kid. And so we just never have financial limitations as a reason someone cannot attend camp. And our follow-up program, our connections program, is completely free of charge. And so that's why partnerships are absolutely critical. If you've signed your kids up for camp, I mean, I've got 2 going to camp, and it's $450 a piece. So $50 is a great deal for a lot of families. We're going to skip the next video, but you can go to the next slide. Yeah. So our next is we are looking for a space to run more consistent drop-in programming in the north side of the city. Looking for a building. We've got about $750,000 allocated and given to us thus far for that project, and so we continue to fundraise for that, knowing that we need to be able to run more than once a week, but multiple times, that we can continue to connect with students that way. You go to the next slide. And you go to the next slide. Yeah. Last thing do before we get into the message is on Saturday, June 1st, I think Saturday is, June 1st. We're doing a motorcycle fundraising event. And so if you ride motorbikes, if you know someone that rides motorbikes, I'd love to chat with you after and get you connected with that. We start at Riverside in St. Albert. We go to the camp for lunch, and then we finish the day in Wetaskiwin at the International Raceway and watch the races that happen there. And so I would love for you to connect with that if you ride bikes. If you don't ride bikes, motorbikes, don't come on your pedal bike. You'll be left behind. It'd be great to see you there. If you have your Bibles, or a Bible app, or somebody beside you has a Bible or one of them, then you can find them. But we are going to turn to Matthew chapter 14. And this is a probably familiar passage of scripture for many, and if it's unfamiliar, then I think you're going to really enjoy it. It's the feeding of the 5,000 miracle. And so we're going to read Matthew chapter 14, starting in verse 13. So what it says, "Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Now when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, This is a desolate place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They said to him, "We only have 5 loaves here and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing. Then he broke the loaves and gave it to his disciples, and the disciples gave it to the crowd. Verse 20. And they all ate and were satisfied, and they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces that were left over. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. So in this passage in verse 13, Jesus had just learned about his cousin John the Baptist's death. Now, John had just been beheaded, and Jesus wanted to find himself a secluded place to be alone. And in this moment of time in Jesus' life, who could blame him for that? And so he gets into a boat, and I can just imagine as he turns the corner to get to shore, he sees this absolutely massive crowd of people. Now, in this moment, Jesus, I put myself in there, serious emotions could have risen up. Jesus could have said, "You know what, today is just not the day that I'm going to be doing this," and he could have turned around. Maybe some language that isn't so Son of God rose up and he spoke it. But the text doesn't say any of that happened. In fact, in verse 14, it said that Jesus had compassion for them. Now, the Bible does say 5,000 men in verse 21. And so with women and children, maybe around 20,000 people, upwards to 20,000 people. And in verse 15, it says the disciples wanted to send the crowds away as it was getting late and people needed food. And remember, skip the dishes was not invented yet, and so just to make a call on your app or if text wasn't really an option. But Jesus in this moment says this absolutely terrifying statement to his disciples. He says, you give them something to eat. Now, in this passage, we hear and see 5 loaves and 2 fish. And in the Gospel of John, it says that they found a boy that had this. And Andrew, one of the disciples, I think says probably something like this when he collects these 5 loaves and 2 fish. He says, Jesus, we totally would feed these people. Obviously, we'd feed these people. But you see, all we have, Jesus, is 5 loaves and 2 fish. And so maybe next time we can be more prepared for this scenario. But Jesus, as you can clearly see, there is not enough food for these people. And so I think we should send them away. I mean, next time we're good. This time we're not. But what does Jesus do, or what does Jesus say? He says, bring it here, and he blesses the food. He then gets the crowds to sit down. Now, I'm fully aware that this next part of this message, I'm going to take some scriptural liberties. So if you could please forgive me for that. I think this is maybe how this played out, and Tyson isn't here to correct me. But I can imagine that Jesus gathers his disciples together. He's just blessed his food. He gathers them together. He gets them to stand in front of him. And he takes this small amount of food that he has and he divides it equally into their hands. Now imagine with me in this moment that you are a disciple standing there looking at Jesus, and all you have in your hand is some fish goop and some bread. And you are told to go feed these people. Now, I can only imagine what is going through the disciples' minds in this moment. Jesus has lost it. This is it. It's been a great ride, Jesus, but I think it's time to get off this train while I can. Maybe they're thinking, Jesus, you've got to be kidding me right now. Jesus, we had this whole plan to follow you, and you're going to make us look like absolute fools right now. But here are the disciples faced with a choice. And so the disciples, with their fish goop and bread, in that moment, turn around and begin walking out to the crowd, probably pretty slowly. Say, oh, hi. I'm sure you're hungry. I have this little bit in my palm of my hand.
Sure.
Oh, you want a little bit more? There's a little bit more if you. Oh, well, there's even more in here than I kind of thought. Hey, would you? Oh, it's even more than I thought. Wow, there's so much here. You want? And as the disciples are going through the crowd, this miracle is taking place, and I can just imagine their faith is rising up as they're going through this moment. And see, as we live in obedience, even if our faith is low, even if we think what we're asked to do in that moment is dumb, even if we are embarrassed and are seriously, God, what is going on? As we step out, he shows up in ways we cannot imagine. But our role is the first step, the obedience. The disciples stepped into a very, very uncomfortable situation, and they had to come face to face with people, and God made his name glorified through it. Maybe your step that you've got to take is inviting someone to church. Maybe it's coming to volunteer at Shiloh this summer. Maybe your step is asking a friend if they're truly doing okay. Maybe it's serving the underprivileged or talking to your neighbor about your faith. Really, it's about being obedient to the call that God has placed on your heart. Maybe it's forgiving someone that you've just been holding on to something for so long. Whatever that is, be obedient to that. The disciples were in this pivotal moment. And you need to know this morning, and let me encourage you that when you find yourself in those pivotal moments, Jesus is there. God is with you. It's not always about being the most courageous person who has no fears whatsoever. But it is in those moments when God asks you to do something that seems unbelievable or completely unrealistic that you begin to realize that as you take the first step, He is working through you to help accomplish His will on the earth. Jesus could have done this miracle without His disciples. He could have. But what a powerful image for us as followers of Jesus that in that moment He wanted to use them. And He wants to use you. I really think by Jesus using the disciples and using us, 4 things happen. And we see this happen in this passage, but I think it happens time and time again in our own lives, is that when God uses us, our faith is built up. In that moment, Jesus provided a hands-on experience for His disciples. Their trust and dependence on God increased. Jesus encouraged them to step out in faith and rely on God's provision. And God showed up. See, God wants to demonstrate His power through people. God can use anyone who is willing to be used for His purpose, even if our willingness is small or if we have significant doubts. I mean, look at Moses. Despite his inability to speak and his own self-doubt, God used him to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. Gideon saw himself as the least in the family of his clan and the weakest, but God used him to deliver Israel from the Midianites. David was this young shepherd boy overlooked by his entire family, yet God chose him to slay Goliath and eventually become the king of Israel. Paul, a persecutor of Christians, was transformed by God and used to spread the gospel around the world. And Peter, known for his impulsive behavior and denial of Jesus 3 times, was still used by God to be a foundational leader of the early church. God uses people who are willing. And even if you're here and you're like, I have got nothing to offer, I can't do it, there's nothing God can use me for, God uses people no matter what we think our ability is, what we think our talent is. Our step is obedience, and God will show up and do the rest. Another thing that happens when God uses people is we learn selflessness and compassion. It was a lesson in caring for others and meeting their needs, even when resources seem scarce. So this morning, don't let anyone's voice, including your own voice, be louder than God's voice. You can do this, and you've got this. We serve a living God who is still working in and through people's lives. We serve a God who loves and cares for us. We serve a God who wants to see us move forward in our faith, and we serve a God who's not going to leave us hanging. Joshua, another guy in the Old Testament, was told numerous times to be strong and courageous. And in Deuteronomy chapter 31, verses 7 and 8, we read these words. Then Moses called to Joshua and said to him in the sight of all of Israel, be strong and courageous, for you shall go with this people into the land which the Lord has sworn to your fathers to give them. And you shall give it to them as an inheritance. The Lord is the one who goes ahead of you. He will be with you. He will not fail you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed. Did you catch that? The Lord is the one who goes ahead of you. The Lord is the one who is with you. So in your moment of doubt, in your moment of fear, in your moment where maybe all you have in your hand is fish scoop and some bread, the Lord is the one who goes ahead of you. He will be with you. He will not fail you. He will not forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed. To wrap up what happened in our passage, the disciples did indeed give all the food out to everyone. And in verse 20 it says they all ate and were satisfied. Then they picked up the leftovers, and we read in the passage, 1 basket remained for each disciple. Our obedience to the clear direction of Christ will produce some unexpected and incredible outcomes that would build our faith and allow us to grow closer to Jesus and have a positive impact on someone's life. Let's pray this morning. God, we are thankful for who you are. We are thankful for your love for people, and we're thankful that you use us to help accomplish your will on this earth. God, I just pray that if there's people in our lives that we need to speak to or step out and have a conversation with, that you would just give us the boldness and the courage to know that you are with us, that you walk with us. And God, we're just grateful for what you're doing. We're grateful for who you are and the impact that you're having, whether it's Shiloh, so many kids and youth that you continue to change their lives, or our families that you continue to speak with and speak to, and we just see you, you working in and through them. God, I just pray that you would go with us this week, that you would give us the courage to have those dialogues and conversations and step out as you call us to. In your name, Jesus, amen. John, what do we do? Oh, okay.
Awesome. Well, we want to thank Keith for joining us today. Thank you for being here. Please have a coffee, stick around, have rich conversation. Thank you for joining us. We will see you next Sunday.